From the 1011 Now streaming studio in Lincoln, Nebraska, this is the REPORT Husker Show, sponsored by Fat Dog's Convenience Store.
Welcome into the 1011 Now streaming studio, everyone. Bill Rentschler alongside Chase Madison for another edition of the REPORT Husker Show, and happy to have live from West Lafayette Sports Director Kevin Sjuts. Kevin, a win is a win is a win. It looked a little bit early ugly, but the second half looked much better. What are your takeaways from the Huskers' first road win of the 2024 campaign?
Well, I think you just said it, Bill. It's a win, and it was ugly. That first half, 0-0. So many penalties in this game, 24 in total. And it seemed like Nebraska's best offense for a while was to throw the ball deep and get a defensive pass interference on Purdue. The game lacked tempo, but in the second half, you saw Dylan Raiola settle in, and you saw Nebraska start to feed Emmett Johnson. He was really productive on the ground, and that's when Nebraska recommitted itself offensively to running the football. That was effective. The Huskers, 28 points. They all came in back-to-back possessions, and then the pick six to cap it off, which John Bullock jokes might have been the first time he's had the ball in his hands in a game since playing in high school.
Kevin, again, it was special teams again that were a huge issue again today. What do you kind of make of that? Because that's an issue that's going to stick with the Huskers for the rest of the season.
What I make of that is Nebraska's lucky that this was a 28-10 game. If it's coming down to the end and a final moment where John Hull has to attempt to kick a field goal, I don't know how confident Husker Nation would be, and I don't know the psyche of the team and how that would be, because you even saw Nebraska on multiple occasions. If it was fourth and short, they had full intent of going for it instead of kicking the field goal. It's not just John Hull. I know a lot of people just quickly point to the transfer from Iowa Western kicker. It's not just him. The snaps weren't good, and Matt Rule pointed that out in the post-game news conference, that both of the blocked field goal attempts, the ball hit the ground on the snap. So there are snapping issues. There, with the bad snap comes a challenging hold, and then it throws off the timing of the whole operation. Watching John Hull during pregame warmups, he looked like a very proficient kicker. It's just unfortunate that when it really matters, he's not having the success that he would like. Keep in mind, he was the one who attempted the potential go-ahead field goal last Friday in the loss to Illinois, and then his first, 3 attempts, 1 miss and then 2 blocks for John Hull. We're all misses here at Purdue. But Nebraska survives and overcomes all of those special teams miscues, and they get out of here with a victory.
Kevin, another bright spot again from today's game. I feel like Sierra Wright again played really, really well, filling in for an injured Tommy Hill. And then you also had Emmett Johnson. Again, Dante Dowdell seemed to have some trouble get going, but Emmett Johnson came in, and it seemed like he really gave the team a really, really big spark.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Emmett Johnson. You look at what he did on the ground. Most of his action coming in the second half. Averaged more than 6 yards per carry. He has 8 rushes for 50 yards. Doesn't find the end zone. The two guys that do find the end zone on the ground were Ja'Cory Barney and Dante Dowdell. I still think Nebraska likes Dowdell the most, but you get to see what kind of changeup that Emmett Johnson brings, and he was making guys miss at the second level, and that's something Marcus Satterfield was talking about with Nebraska's run game earlier in the week, is we don't need to just get in the hole, we need to get to the second level and make a move. And he thought that would maybe be a big part of Nebraska's success offensively on the ground. And keep in mind, Nebraska had less than 50 rushing yards at halftime. It was an ugly, awkward game in the first half. There were jokes about it deserves to be on Peacock, the subscription service which televised the game. And there was also some jokes about, well, it's Purdue, probably the worst team in the Big Ten. A lot of folks at home probably changed the channel. But if you stuck with the Huskers, and there was a good crowd here, by the way, of Nebraska fans, and they stuck here. Purdue students left when it was 14-3. But there were snippets of how good Nebraska can be. The team that played against UTEP, the team that played against Colorado, I don't know that Nebraska was at that level, but you saw moments in the second half where the Huskers started to improve their play, and Matt Rule summed it up by saying, we are a developing team. And he pointed out some of the guys that were on the field asked to make a play in a key moment. Ja'Cory Barney, true freshman. Carter Nelson with the jump over the pile that got stuffed, true freshman. The quarterback, by the way, true freshman. It's a young team, like we talked about last week, there are going to be growing pains with this squad. Thankfully for Nebraska, while they grow, they're able to still have success. Now 4-1 on the season. They head back home, and they face undefeated Rutgers next Saturday at Memorial Stadium.
Chase, did you have anything you wanted to ask Kevin while he's live out there in West Lafayette?
Yeah, well, obviously, Kevin, the message repeated after the game was that this was a turning point type of game. Rule was okay that it was a gritty win, but just did you feel like the refs kind of were the third team on the field today, or was it really just some sloppy football all around that led to so many flags being thrown?
I'm sorry, Bill. You're going to have to get out Google Translate. I can't hear what Chase said, so transcribe the Chase E's for me, please.
He was saying were the refs the third team on the field there. There was a lot of laundry on the field throughout the day. I think over 250 yards and penalties. There was a lot of laundry. What do you want, them to not throw the flag on some of the defensive pass interference? Guys were getting draped all over. And some of it's procedural. Nebraska, we saw them false start. There were a couple of delay of games for Nebraska, which they wanted to have happen because Brian Buschini wanted a little bit more room to play with when he was going to punt the football. I think the one thing that really upsets Nebraska fans that watch this game was the Ramir Johnson touchdown that got called back. I even talked to Thomas Fedoni after the game, and he said, I didn't touch him. The flag was on Fedoni, and some contact is they said it was offensive pass interference because he contacted a Purdue defender, and he's like, I didn't touch him. And he was mindful that could get that play called back, and he said he even tried to be pretty aware of where he was and where the defender was. I get the argument that there was maybe a third team out there, and that's the Zebras, and they were against Nebraska, but maybe a couple of times you could have a legit argument. And then the one in the second half where it led to Matt Rule throwing his headset and getting a unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. I don't think Matt Rule seemed to regret doing that one bit. He said he's only been flagged 3 times in his coaching career. This is the third. And he had a very passionate answer when he was asked about that during the postgame news conference. Rule simply said that somebody has to start fighting for Nebraska. And he knows Troy Dannon well, Nebraska's athletic director, and he is as well. And I think Matt Rule knows by him, it wasn't like an outburst. He wasn't raging. He was simply trying to make a point. And when his players see him really push the issue that way, maybe you can fire them up. It's almost like a basketball coach getting a technical foul. Sometimes they do it in the spirit of, I'm trying to light a fire for my team.
Yeah, Kevin, just to touch on kind of Rule with some great comments post-game, but then also just a lot of good comments, we heard from Raiola and Jamal Banks, kind of, throwing a counterpunch in the second half. Do you feel like the offense, what was working well to kind of get the ball in the end zone in the second half? Obviously, the third down conversion's a big factor, but Raiola, a really impressive game, a clean stat sheet, but the offense really didn't feel like they were doing anything until that second half. What was the magic to kind of get the ball rolling and moving?
Don't know. Might be having some audio issues there with Sports Director Kevin Sjuts.
Bill, I just cannot hear Chase. Okay. So you're gonna have to be
That's okay.
Play the game of telephone for me, please.
That's okay. That's okay. Chase was asking basically what was the difference in the second half for the offense to kind of get the ball in the end zone. First half they got it on the Purdue side of the field, but they just could not punch it in the end zone. What made the difference in the second half?
Playing with a little bit more confidence, and I think they were starting to wear Purdue down. You got the sense that Purdue felt like in the second half they started to teeter a little bit. Their confidence was shaken because Nebraska in the first half, it could have been a 21-0 game at halftime, but the Huskers had the block kick, they had a drive stall out, and they had a missed field goal. So I just feel like Nebraska, the only difference was Nebraska was finally able to punch the ball all the way through, and they continued to lean on their playmakers. And Dylan Raiola had pretty good protection in the second half as well. We saw him with time in the pocket, able to hit Thomas Fidone, able to hit Jamal Banks. Kind of a quiet game for Isaiah Nair, but Nebraska is still able to spread the football around a little bit. But I only feel like those passes are successful because of the emergence of Emmett Johnson running the football in the second half.
Yeah, he was really dynamic in the second half, Kevin. All right, we know you got a long drive ahead of you to get back here to Lincoln. You still got some stuff to finish up before newscast tonight. You'll have full report coming up at 6 and 10 o'clock tonight, as will Chase Madison. So, Kevin, we'll go ahead and let you go. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it as always.
4-1, homecoming next week. The Huskers host Rutgers, and better enjoy that one. Nebraska has a stretch with road games and a bye week in there, and all of a sudden, that home schedule, it starts to go by pretty quickly. So those folks that have a ticket to watch Nebraska play inside Memorial Stadium at 3 o'clock next Saturday, make sure you don't just take that for granted. Look forward to it.
All right, appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you very much. We'll see you when you get back into the studio. Chase, again, it was a very ugly first half, 0-0 at the half. But again, things really got turned around pretty quickly in the second half for Matt Rhule and the Huskers.
Yeah, the first half, I was falling asleep watching that first half.
It was, yeah.
Everything from a football game, from a standpoint, people I saw online were saying, like, this game deserves to be on Peacock because for those at home watching, it was streaming only, so you had to stream it. But yeah, the first half was just the definition of unforced errors and mistakes. And we talked about, there being a ton of laundry and penalties on the field. But overall, there was still blatant mistakes beyond the penalties, right? Nebraska only had 5 penalties in the first half. Yes, some of them were costly, but it was more poor execution in short third down, goal-to-go situations. And then a missed field goal by John Hull, who Rhule said he's a developing kicker. We're a developing team. Rhule even said, he's 50-50 from 15, but he might be 50-50 from 45. So, and then, Kevin touched on it. Those other 2 missed field goals that were both blocked were due to bad snaps / just operation. And it wasn't. You can't just say it's the kicking game. It's the entire field goal operation that is the issue.
It really makes you
Camden
appreciate.
with Tucky, and there's Aiden Fledge, who are both the long snappers. It makes you appreciate Marco Ortiz. The unsung hero from a season ago. And it just proves how important a long snapper is. Now, I will say that while it really wasn't the team responded counterpunched in the second half on every level. And one area that will kind of go unnoticed, but it is good to see, is that while they are only maybe 15-yard field goals, it was good that they hit 4 extra points, 4 for 4 in the second half. So, and we've seen Tristan Alvano miss kicks almost as short as that. So, obviously this was John Hull, but having the operationally and the mechanics go so poorly in the first half, it was great to see the second half, beyond the touchdowns, beyond the defense stepping up in the second half as well. But the defense played great all day. You saw the special teams also improve in the second half.
I think one of my favorite moments from this game was to see Brian Boomshini lay a pretty big hit on a Purdue returner. I think Boomshini was registered for 3 tackles in this game.
They opened the second half with a try to do a trickery on the return of the kickoff, which looked like it was initially kind of working until you had Brian Boomshini filling his lane to a T, or Brian Boomshini.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, 3 tackles. 3
tackles.
Solo tackles. That's probably a new career high for him, maybe. But Nebraska has punted a lot in the past, so I wouldn't put it past him. And actually, Brian Boomshini had a pretty good day. Only 103 total punting yards, but that was because he was trying to strategically
he was
pin
punting
it.
about at the 50-yard line, yeah.
He had, and they took a false start, or they took a delay of game in the first half, which goes on the penalty books, but they did that to give him more room to punt. And then they tried doing it again, and Ryan Walters and Purdue declined it. Boomshini Buschini had 3 punts. I know we shouldn't be just talking about the punter, but first half it was a stagnant game. 3 punts, and 2 of them inside the 20. I think one of them was inside the 11 or something. Yeah. But really, it should have been 3 inside the 20. His first punt was a beauty that literally died at the 4. But Emmett Johnson, I think, just as a gunner, was too focused on trying to see if he could beat up or push the Purdue Boilermaker player, and then the ball went in the end zone. But, overall, it was impressive to see the special teams also take a nice step up and have clean execution in the second half compared to the first half.
Yeah. So Raiola finished 17 for 27, 257 yards, 1 touchdown, no interception. He had a couple of those drops last week when Nebraska was trying to come back. Didn't see any of that this week. Got cleaned up. So their ball never hit the ground.
He was a little loosey-goosey with it last week. This week, definitely more calm. I thought the O-line played pretty well. He had a ton of time in the pocket. I thought the sack he had that really set one of their drives back. It was the only sack by Purdue. I believe it was in the second half. That one, I'm not saying it was all on Raiola.
He probably held on to it a little bit
He rolled out and kind of got lost looking downfield and then realized it was a little bit too late to escape. Best way to describe it. But overall, Raiola played really well. We talk about great incompletions, and Mahomes always they always like to glaze his incompletions, but Raiola was smart with the football. There was one throw where he just sailed it out of the back of the end zone where no one was catching it. He had another throw at the goal line where he didn't like either look, and he just threw it in the dirt. And he was in the pocket, so he threw it in the dirt where it's not intentional grounding because it was a receiver in the area.
That's when they're on the 2-yard line.
Yeah. And that's a play you don't see a lot from a freshman quarterback making. A lot of times a freshman quarterback will try to force it. We didn't see Raiola take off with his legs as much this game. There was one play where he threw a sidearm dangerous ball back to Nair, I should say, and it looked like he had a lane. So interesting. Raiola, I don't think he registered.
No, one rush for -8 yards.
Yeah, and I think that was technically the sack. Yeah. So you can see that set him back. But he was really smart with the ball today, and I think you got to chalk up probably half his incompletions to
just throwing it away.
And to be honest, I think he probably had more 35, 36 technically registered throws, but they didn't count because of pass interference calls on Purdue. And so those you're not registered for an incompletion in a play like that.
Yeah.
But the Purdue, the refs were calling pretty much everything, and they weren't really giving any leeway.
24 total penalties,
but the
259 yards,
and that's across both teams.
That's for both teams.
Yeah.
Whew. I want to ask you again, just don't want to go on too long here. First 2 games, it was really, I feel like, kind of Isaiah Nayor that did a lot of damage. And Jamal Banks was there, but maybe kind of quiet. But I feel like Jamal Banks, the last 2 games, has really kind of emerged. He almost went for 100 last week. And then this week, he's the leading receiver, 5 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown for Jamal Banks.
Yeah, I think Banks kind of found his role. And I think Nayor is definitely a little bit more explosive. But I also think it took a little bit of time for Raiola and Banks to kind of get on the same page as Nair and him, because you can run a ton of these mesh concepts and these deep digs where they're having a play that's a little bit longer to develop, and compared to Nair getting a mesh concept where he's a drag route and he's the first read and it's 4 seconds into the play and it's zipped out of there. When he has more time, I think Raiola favors throwing it to Banks just because Banks had 82 yards. He was averaging 16 yards a catch. These were first down leading catches. He wasn't throwing it to Banks dink and dump, right? So I think it just took a little bit of time because you can see how your plays look against your own team, but it takes a few weeks to kind of get under the belt of, well, when we run this play, what is defense is usually reacting, right? Or who are they likening to? Or now Ja'Cory Barney's having a big game. He's a distraction piece when he's not getting the ball in his hands as well. And I thought what Ja'Cory did in the running game was really dynamic. I'd like to see him involved a little bit more in the pass game, but they've found a way. They basically have decided, like, we have some good receivers on the outside. We have some big receivers. Corey's like 105 pounds. He's obviously more than that. He's like, the best way for him to be a difference maker is just to hand him the ball.
Little pop passes.
And, yeah.
So
Kind of same with, like, kind of a little bit same with Carter Nelson at times. Like, you can tell that the offense is trying to see what he can do because he's at dynamic speed for his size.
Ja'Cory Barney finishes with 4 rushing attempts for 66 yards. He obviously finished with the touchdown run there towards the end of the game, and then he added, it was 2 receptions for 28 yards. So he almost had 100 total yards there of offense with the touchdown. So, again, he had another good game. Matt Rule kind of singled out Gunnar Gatula there in the press conference. Said that media didn't ask anything about him because...
And I think he was saying that because he played well.
Yeah.
And, this week's Know Your Husker was Gunnar Gatula. So shout out Gunnar, the Grizzly Bear, former Lincoln Southeast product. Really cool to see him. And, Rule basically said, like, I'm glad you guys aren't asking about it. I'm fired up because, if a lot of times the beat writers will draw attention to the glaring mistakes. Obviously, they'll throw praise here and there as well, but if Raiola was sacked 3 times and they all came from the left edge, we would have known who that was. Gunnar Gatula played a pretty clean game, and going back on it, the offensive line played really well. I think they did a lot better in pass protection. There was a few runs that just felt like either it was the run design or Purdue's just filling the box. There was a decent amount of runs that just felt like Purdue already were in the backfield. And Dowdell did his best effort to try to run over some people.
But Emmett Johnson just he makes people miss.
Yeah, Emmett Johnson is a difference maker, and then I believe it was Ramir Johnson. Was it Ramir Johnson who had the touchdown that was called back?
I think it was
initially.
Ramir. I think Rule said it was Emmett, but it was Ramir.
It was one of the first play of the second half. First play of the second half, I think it was a 4th and 3. The first play of the second quarter, I should say. They'd already had a missed field goal, and so they were going for it. And it was this was the one call that if Nebraska had lost this game by a field goal, people would have been up in arms about because they called a lot of pass interference all game. The refs did, and most of them were either like it could go either way or it was clearly a penalty. This one was the most
egregious.
Very, very hard to understand what the refs were seeing there because the defender was impacted by the pick play or the route that Thomas Fidone ran to get Ramir Johnson open, but he was impacted without Thomas Fidone touching him.
Yes.
And that is a key example of great, keen play design by Glenn Thomas and Marcus Satterfield, that was the whole point of the play is to get him open. It worked, but the refs just see the defender get moved, and maybe it was just the ref's angle. But, that was a tough one. But overall, you saw the difference makers, Ramir Johnson and especially Emmett Johnson, who really even alluded to. He's like, I'd like to get Emmett more involved. It just depends on how the game's going. And against Colorado and against Illinois, for example, they were having some more success kind of ground and pound, less outside zone or pitch concepts, and they weren't playing well up the middle today against Purdue. Beyond a 4th down and goal that really kind of kept the momentum rolling for Nebraska to make it 14-3 when Dowdell punched it in from 1 yard out. Besides that, they really weren't playing well in the middle and going up the middle and kind of those power and those counter runs. But Emmett, when he gets in space, is really dynamic.
So to wrap things up, Kevin mentioned it. You have a Rutgers team that's likely going to be coming to Lincoln next week that's now 4-0.
They might be ranked.
They probably, I think they were in the receiving votes. There's a chance they could be. They just beat Washington last night, 21-18. And then they also beat Virginia Tech. So they beat 2 good teams, or at least 2 Power 4 teams the last 2 weeks. And then Greg Schiano, he's a good ball coach. He knows how to coach. So this is going to be another tough Big Ten slog for Nebraska next week.
Yeah, 4-0 for Rutgers. I believe they've already had a bye week. Howard, Akron, but then impressive wins against Virginia Tech and Washington, and both those are close games. So Rutgers have proven that the Scarlet Knights can win in close games, and that's something Nebraska has struggled at. And but today they showed resiliency, and it was a close game, and then they pulled away. But you can't really count this as a close win, but it's definitely it had the same makeups of a resilient, gritty win. And Rule even alluded to that, saying like we wanted it, like we felt great in this spot because we kind of needed a game like this. And then by the midway of the fourth quarter, they had won the game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Rutgers is a talented team. They have a fantastic running back,
Cal Monungai.
Yeah, and I believe their quarterback is a guy who beat Nebraska last year, in Ethan Kaliakmanis, who was the former Minnesota quarterback.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. No, it is Ethan.
Nope.
Yeah, and Kyle, the running back, over 130 yards carrying last night against Washington. They play good defense. They're a tough football team. And Virginia Tech is, I think, 2-3 now, but you saw what they almost knocked off Miami.
Mm-hmm.
A play that could have almost gone either way last night.
I don't know how they overturned that. I mean,
the final moments. I don't know. The ball was kind of moving. I was focused on our high school sports overtime, but yeah. So this is it's a good spot that it's at home, and Purdue is not a daunting environment. It did look like there was a pretty good turnout of Husker fans, but it will definitely be another test, and it for sure is. They needed the way they won today to really kind of boost this team. If they had, scored late and then played good defense and won 7-3, you're happy you showed resiliency and you won, but you didn't clean up really much of the mistakes in the first half.
There would have been a lot more grumbling in Husker Nation.
And just a final point too, the offense was so stagnant in the first half. I think everyone's talking about the way they responded in the second half, but you have to give a lot of credit to the defense for playing really a complete game for 60 minutes. I know with some of the backups in there towards the end, Purdue added a touchdown. I will say that the defense got a little tired in the third, I felt like, when Purdue went on an 8-minute drive, similar to what Illinois did a week prior with Altmaier leading them all the way down the field and scoring, and that really was kind of a punch in the mouth. Luckily, the offense responded to not have the defense on short rest. But after that one drive, Purdue was pretty much shut down the whole time. 5 sacks, the John Bullock pick six. So
just 13 rushing yards, and I know they were throwing it there for most of the fourth quarter. They were down, but only 13 rushing yards for Purdue.
And only 50 as a team. So really impressive day against the run, and pretty decent day against the pass. I know Nebraska is definitely banged up in the secondary, and it showed a little bit with Tommy Hill not being able to go. He warmed up, but then wasn't able to go. And then Sierra Wright, who I thought played a really good game, but he was kind of doing it banged up. He got hurt. He hurt his knee, came back. They were still going to him. And then you saw Jeremiah Charles playing a little bit, Mario Buford. So they were going to some other players that made plays on the back end, and they kind of needed them to in a game that wasn't going Nebraska's way offensively for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah. All right. Well, Chase, do we have 6 or 6:30 today? We have our show.
We are on after the conclusion of the Wisconsin-USC game on CBS.
All right. So I know you still have stuff to do to get ready for that. So we'll go ahead and we'll end it here. Is there anything else you wanted to get in before we end it?
Dylan Raiola, fresh haircut. Looked good.
I did not notice that. Did he have some fresh stripes there?
It's like a little Z.
Little lightning bolt or something like that?
It's his own swagger.
All right, well, Chase, appreciate it. And again, we thank Kevin Sjuts again for his live report there from West Lafayette. He'll have more reports along with Chase coming up in our evening shows tonight in the End Report. So appreciate everyone for tuning in and for watching again. As always, until next time, hope everyone has a nice weekend.
You've been listening to the REPORT Husker Show, sponsored by Fat Dog's Convenience Store. Watch, listen, and stream on the 1011 Now app, on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more Husker coverage throughout the week, watch the End Report on 1011 Sports at 6 and 10 p.m.